Thank you for joining us today for another Lyons Falls Library interview. Today we are chatting with Glenn Eric Miller, regional author of Camper Girl and Red's First Snow. Both books are available here at the Lyons Falls Library, plus some other libraries in the system. Glenn, how are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I grew up in Clinton, just a little ways south of here, and I've always loved reading and writing. One of my favorite spots in the school was the school library. I would always find a quiet corner and just pull random books off the shelves and read about all sorts of things. So I was a big reader when I was younger. And then I went to college locally. I went to Oswego, SUNY Oswego. Lived in Syracuse, lived in Utica, and I was working in social work and human services right out of college. And then I went back to school to get my master's at Binghamton, and ever since then I've been teaching college English. I've taught here in New York and now down in Florida as well. So.
Great. So in your opinion, what makes for a good storyteller?
I think a good storyteller, first and foremost, has to be kind of take themselves out of the story and let the story tell itself. And it's about kind of putting the writer's ego to the side and letting the story unfold and being respectful of where the story wants to go. A lot of times, you read a story and you can hear the author's voice. It's coming through too much, and my favorite authors are the ones that just kind of sit back and let the story tell itself and respect that. And I think it comes down to a little dash of humility, just letting the story speak for itself, and of course a journey of some sort. There has to be a good story. Has to have a desire and challenges that need to be overcome, and growth from the beginning to the end of the character. And if a storyteller is kind of heavy-handed with that, then it can ruin the story. So yeah, I think it comes down to good storytellers have to put their ego aside and let the story tell itself.
It's a good perspective. So where do you draw inspiration for your writing?
Mostly just from everyday occurrences, things that I see, conversations that I overhear or have, sometimes some news reports here and there. I'm really drawn to everyday experiences, I guess common experiences you might call them. I'm not drawn to the over-the-top kind of, how do I say it, sensationalist kind of stories. I'm not drawn toward books or tales of popular celebrities or doctors and lawyers. I really enjoy stories about other people that you might run into on a daily basis. So I think that there's so many stories to be told that get overlooked, and I'm fascinated by digging deeper and finding out more about those characters' backgrounds and where they might have lived and where they might be going, and all that. So, and then I have all these random ideas, and then they got all shuffled up in my head as I sleep, and then I wake up and things start to connect. And so I'll say, well, this character over here is similar to this, character over here, and what would happen if they were combined and took part in the same adventure together, and start to see connections the more you play with it, and open your mind to it.
Neat. So tell us about your publishing journey. What has that been like?
Oh boy, long. I had published some short stories and poems along the way in magazines and journals and online, e-zines over the years, and then I had worked on a couple of novels, but I never really felt like they were ready. Uh, so they were kind of my trials, you know. And then Camper Girl came along, and I really felt good about it. I spent a good 3 years on it. I got it critiqued at workshops and felt great about it. Sent it out into the world. I wrote tons of query letters, and I got some good responses, but no takers ultimately from publishers or agents. So I shelved it for a couple of years, and I worked on other things, more short stories and whatnot. And then showed it to some other people, and they said, you know, this is really promising. You should work on it some more. By that time, I wasn't sick of it anymore, so I felt kind of rejuvenated. So I liken it to remodeling the house. I just tore it down to the studs, and I kept the basic framework that was there, but I revised an enormous amount of it for another 3 years, to the point where I felt confident again to put it out there. I put it out there, and I found a home with a great mid-sized publisher in North Carolina, and they've been amazing to work with. At this point, I've gotten so many rejections that I thought, oh, okay, this email can't be real, you know. So I had to like reread it a couple times, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they really do, you know, like this book. And then it was another 1.5 years or so of more revisions and editing before it actually hit the shelf. So it's a very long process, and it's an exercise in patience and persistence, definitely. So, and now they're happy to work with me on another book. So I have a couple projects in the works.
Great. So can you walk us through your writing process? How does an idea turn into a fully fleshed out story? I know you talked about the connections a little bit and shuffling ideas around, but
yeah, really, it's that plus a lot of exploratory writing. I do a lot of before I actually write the story, I'll write kind of a written conversation with myself. What about this, and what about that? And what if I connect this to that, and you know, try to look for connections that, and the more I write, the more I come up with other ideas. And then I'll look at it the next day and I'll say, oh, those are terrible ideas, and then I'll write more ideas. And so it's just this ongoing, you know, regular exploration. And then I'll start to write some dialogue from the main character's point of view and try to find a voice. I'll write some descriptions of interesting places that I might want to set a story in, or a character, and then kind of pulling it all together over time. And it's a long process. It's not something that, you know, you can do real quickly. Well, you can, but most of the time that's not what ends up on the printed page, you know. So there's a lot of exploratory and pre-writing that goes into you know, formulating an idea that's strong enough, that's really going to hold a reader's attention and the writer's attention as well over a long period of time. So, and that's what happened with Camper Girl. I couldn't ignore the story any longer. It kept drawing me back to it, and that just started with a couple of ideas connecting in my head years and years ago, and me putting them down on paper, and you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of words later, here it is. So.
great. How important is revision in crafting a final work for you?
Huge. The first drafts are messy, and they're supposed to be messy, and they're filled with loose ends and dead ends, and you know, plot that doesn't go anywhere, characters that show up and then disappear, and all of those wrinkles are taken care of in the revision process. I joke with people that by the time I was done with Camper Girl and sent the final edits to the publisher, that I knew the book, verbatim, because I worked on it so many times over, and just when I thought that it was perfect and ready to go, the publisher would say, well, what about this scene here? Do you think maybe we could change this a little bit, or this wording doesn't seem to, so it's probably 95% of writing is revision. It's all about reworking what you have, and there's something very magical about drafting an idea and getting it on paper the first time, and that's kind of the the creative side of your brain at work, and then the other side of your brain kicks in where you start to revise and edit with an eye toward perfecting what's there. It's like a big chunk of clay, or and then you just keep chipping away at it or molding it over a long period of time, and that's revision.
Neat. So your website contains a great many insights into the development and success of Camper Girl. But what is the story behind Red's first snow? Especially, what was it like working with an illustrator?
Red was inspired by our dog, who looks like a little fox. And when he was a puppy, he experienced snow for the first time here in the North Country, and didn't know if he loved it or hated it at first. And I just always thought that was kind of an interesting play on the childlike experience of learning about the world around you. And so so the dog morphed into this little fox pup named Red, and I always envisioned my dog just ran around in the fields covered with snow and made all these trails, and then kept following the trails around and finding his own scent and rolling around in the snow and eating it, and then didn't like it on his paws, and so it was just really fun to watch that, and so I molded that into a story. And again, it's picture books are relatively short, but it's a lot of revision. It's a lot of, because you might only have 200 words as opposed to 50 or 60,000 words. So every word has to be really precise and very careful. And it also the placement on the page and where you leave a page, so that young readers want to turn the page and see what happens next. That's all a big part of it as well. So working with the illustrator was really a great learning experience. Learning about how to craft and lay out a picture book in a way that tells a story and has a character arc, but 6-7-year-olds aren't going to pay attention to that. They just want a funny story with this cute little fox. So, but it's important to still have that arc, to have the young children want to turn the page, and then when they're done with it, to go back to the beginning and want to read it over and over and over again. So it's about bringing the character to life on the page. And honestly, my experience with the illustrator was wonderful. Everything that she showed me just blew me away. Like, oh my gosh, that's perfect. That's exactly what I pictured. And then she would come back to me and say, well, what if we do this? I have an idea for this spread or this image, but the wording doesn't necessarily go along with it. Can we change it a little bit? And so it was this really wonderful cooperative experience over several months. And so yeah, I'm really excited about that. This book getting into the hands of young children, especially up here in the North Country, and because it's all about how snow can be really fun, and just new things can be fun. Don't be afraid of new things and new experiences. And I'm working on a number of other picture books as well, so I'm excited to get those into the hands of young readers also.
Great. Do you want to elaborate on what you have in the works at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had my mother especially, but also other people have said, "Oh, what happens next with Shannon, the main character in Camper Girl?" So I am working on a sequel to Camper Girl, which takes her on a new journey, and then I have another book, another young adult novel that I'm working on. That's the first one that I'm working on. That's about a young boy who experiences the juvenile detention system, and again, just learns a lot about himself and about life in general and the system. And so those are two young adult books that I'm working on. And then one of the picture books that I'm working on is about a young boy who attends a concert in a city and falls in love with the idea of playing guitar, and so he builds his own guitar out of like a shoebox and a piece of wood and some random strings and stuff. And so it's all about imagination and play, and there's a lot of onomatopoeia in it. So it's a really fun. I think it's going to be a really fun book for young kids to read. Lots of fun sounds and rhyming that they can play around with. So I have a book. Picture book in the works about recycling, and then another one that has to do with not liking to read and the joys of reading. So I'm really passionate about education and reading and literacy and nature, and all of these themes come into play with all the things that I want to write. So it's exciting to see that come to fruition.
We are looking forward to keeping track of your journey, for
Great.
sure.
Wonderful.
So, who are some of your favorite authors?
I grew up reading a lot of Matt Christopher, who was he wrote a lot of middle grade books about sports, and I loved sports, and so everything from baseball to football stories, and so I just like consumed them left and right as a young guy, and then as I got older, I fell in love with books, everything from Hemingway to Steinbeck to Louise Erdrich. I'm also a big fan of science fiction, so Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and Ray Bradbury. There's some new writers that I really like. There's a gentleman, Jason Reynolds, who writes young adult books, and I think he's fantastic. Just really, really inventive, creative, and he's the type of writer, like I was talking about before, who he pays attention to the story. He respects the story, and so when you look at or read his books, you are fully immersed in the story and the characters on the page, and you don't even think about Jason, as a writer. You don't hear his voice, although of course his voice is there, he's a writer, but he puts himself to the side, and so there's so many more. I could go on and on, but I'm drawn toward a lot of different genres, but I'm also drawn toward writers like Hemingway, who write very short, distinct sentences, and again, let the story just kind of tell itself. But I also love, I just reread Dune because I wanted to read it again before the new movie version came out. 600 pages. It's pretty long-winded, but it's beautiful in its own way. It's just gorgeous writing. So I like all sorts of different things. And as far as inspiring my own writing, I don't know. I'm not really sure. I don't really try to copy anybody, and it's not in my head as I'm doing it. So I'll let somebody else make a connection if they see any.
Great. We always try to ask, what the folks we're talking to are reading. Just book suggestions are what we thrive on here.
Yeah,
so.
I love the classics, and there's so much amazing young adult, middle grade writing going on these days, and just in the last 10 or 15 years. It's just so inventive and so powerful and timely, and so K.L. Going, Jason Reynolds. I'm not personally a huge fan of John Green, but I understand the appeal of John Green to a lot of young readers. So, there's just really wonderful voices out there to be heard.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah.
Last question. I know for a fact that we have some aspiring young writers in our Lyons Falls patron community. What would you consider the 2 most important traits or practices for newer writers to cultivate?
I think the first one would be going back to humility, be humble, and respect the craft. And there are thousands and thousands of writers that have come before us, and it's important to have confidence, but it's also important to learn and be open-minded to learning. And as a young person, I was never, I thought I was, much better than I was. So there's something to be said for confidence, but I think it's also important to study the craft as much as possible. And then as you get older, you realize the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know anything, or how little you know, and that just comes with maturity and experience. I feel like I'm just beginning, myself, and I've been writing for decades now. I think that along with humility and understanding the craft and studying what's come before you, persistence is key. The key to any kind of success, I think, is just staying with it, staying with the game, so to speak. And so there's a lot of great writers that have never been published because they get bored or they lose interest. And then there's a lot of stuff out there that maybe shouldn't have gotten published, but the writers are very persistent and they work it to their advantage. So like I said about revisions, there's so much writing to be done before anything is publishable or worthy of an audience, and you just have to work through that. It's like any kind of creative pursuit, whether it's painting or cooking or building things. There's a lot of duds that you have to kind of get out of your system, so to speak. If you're starting to learn how to cook, you're not going to make gourmet meals right away. You're going to make a lot of meals that end up in the trash. And that's the same with writing. You're going to write a lot of junk, and that's okay. It's part of the process. So be persistent, be patient with yourself, and be humble as well, and you'll do great things. There's a lot of books in the world. There's a lot of stories told, but there's always room for more. And there's always room for another book on the shelf, so to speak.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with us today. Any final thoughts?
No, thank you so much, and I think it's wonderful what local community libraries do. So thank you for staying open and being a welcoming place for young readers, especially.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.
What we're here for. Thank you. It was great speaking with Glenn. If you're interested in either of these books, they're available for checkout here at the Lyons Falls Library. And you can keep up with Glenn on his website at www.glennericmiller.com. You can also follow him on Facebook at Glenn Eric Miller or on Instagram at GMillerWriter.